Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight's story is called The Necklace by Guy de Maupassant. For one shining moment, but only one, she was elegant, beautiful, acceptable. She was one of those pretty, charming girls, born as if by a mistake of destiny into a family of clerks. She had no dowry, no expectations, no means of being known, appreciated, loved, married by a man either rich or distinguished, and she allowed herself to be married to a petty clerk at the Ministry of Education. She was simply dressed, not being able to dress richly, but unhappy as one out of her class, for women have no caste or race. Their beauty, their grace, and their charm serve them in the place of good birth and family. Their native sensitiveness, their instinct for elegance, their suppleness of wit, are their only aristocracy, making some daughters of the people the equal of the greatest ladies. She suffered incessantly, feeling herself born for every delicacy and every luxury. She suffered from the poverty of her apartment, from the shabby walls, from the worn-out chairs, from the ugliness of it all. All these things, which another woman of her station might not have noticed, tortured and angered her. The sight of the little Breton girl, who did simple housework for her, roused in her sad regrets and desperate dreams. She dreamed of quiet antechambers padded with oriental hangings and lit by bronze candelabras, and of 2 tall footmen in knee breeches who slept in the wide armchairs in the heavy heat of a hot air stove. She dreamed of great reception rooms hung in oil silks, of fine furniture adorned with priceless bric-a-brac, and of dainty drawing-rooms, perfumed, made for 5 o'clock chats with one's most intimate friends, men known and sought after, whose attentions all women envied and desired. When she seated herself for dinner, before the round table, where the tablecloth had been used 3 days, opposite her husband, who took the lid off the soup tureen and declared with an air of enchantment, "Ah, the good old boiled beef and carrots. I don't know anything better than that." She would dream of elegant dinners, of glittering silver plate, of tapestries, peopling the walls with figures of the days of old, and with strange birds amidst a fairy forest. She would dream of exquisite food served in marvelous dishes, of whispered gallantries listened to with a sphinx-like smile. All the while eating the rose-colored flesh of a trout or the wings of a grouse. She had no fine dresses, no jewels, nothing, and she loved those things only. She felt herself made for them. She would have liked so much to please, to be envied, to be seductive, exquisite, and sought after. She had a rich woman friend, a schoolmate of convent days, whom she did not like to visit because she suffered so much when she returned. She would weep for whole days, from sorrow, from regret, from despair, and from wretchedness. One evening, her husband came in elatedly, holding in his hand a large envelope. "Here," he said, "here is something for you." She tore open the wrapper quickly and drew out a printed card that bore these words: "The Minister of Education and Madame Gorgeous Ramponneau ask the honor of Monsieur and Madame Loisel company on Monday evening, the 18th of January, at the Minister's residence." Instead of being delighted as her husband had hoped, she threw the invitation spitefully on the table, retorting, "What do you expect me to do with that?" "But, my dear, I thought it would make you happy. You never go out, and this is an opportunity, a fine one. I've had no end of trouble to get it. Everybody wants one. It is very exclusive, and not many invitations are given to the clerks. You'll see the whole official world there." She looked at him angrily and declared impatiently, "What do you expect me to wear to such a thing as that?" He hadn't thought of that. He stammered, "Why, the dress you go to the theater in. I think that's a very nice one." He stopped speaking, stupefied, dismayed, seeing that his wife was crying. Noting 2 great tears slowly falling from the corners of her eyes toward the corners of her mouth, he stammered, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" But with a violent effort, she regained her composure and answered in a calm voice, wiping her wet cheeks, "Nothing. Only I have no dress, and consequently I can't go to this reception. Give your invitation to one of your colleagues whose wife is better fitted out than I am." In despair, he tried again. "See here, Matilda. How much would it cost to get a suitable dress? Something you could use again on other occasions, something very simple." She reflected a few seconds, reckoning up the cost and thinking as well of a sum that she could ask for without an immediate refusal, and a frightened exclamation from the thrifty clerk. "I can't tell exactly, but it seems to me that 400 francs ought to cover it." He turned a little pale, for he had saved just that sum to buy a gun, so that he might be able to join hunting parties next summer on the plains of Nanterre, where some friends who were going to shoot at larks up there on Sundays. Nevertheless, he answered, "Very well. I'll give you 400 francs, but try to have a pretty dress." The day of the reception approached, and Mademoiselle seemed sad, uneasy, anxious. Nevertheless, her dress was nearly ready. One evening, her husband said to her, "What's the matter with you? You have acted strangely for 2 or 3 days." And she answered, "I'm vexed at not having some jewels, not a single stone, nothing to adorn myself with. I shall look dreadfully poverty-stricken. I'd almost rather not go to this affair." He replied, "You can wear real flowers. At this season they'll look very chic. For 10 francs you can have 2 or 3 magnificent roses." She was not convinced. "No, there's nothing more humiliating than to look poor among rich women." Then her husband cried out, "How stupid we are! Go and find your friend Madame Forestier, and ask her to lend you some jewels. You're well enough acquainted with her to do that." She uttered a cry of joy. "It is true," she said. "I hadn't thought of that." The next day she went to her friend and related her story of distress. Madame Forestier went to her glass-fronted wardrobe, took out a large jewel case, brought it over, opened it, and said, "Choose, my dear." She saw at first some bracelets, then a string of pearls, then a Venetian cross of gold, and jewels of admirable workmanship. She tried on the jewels before the mirror, hesitated, but could neither decide to take them nor leave them. Then she asked, "Have you nothing else?" "Why, yes. Look for yourself. I don't know what would please you most." Suddenly she discovered, in a black satin box, a superb necklace of diamonds, and her heart beat fast with intense desire. Her hands trembled as she took them up. She fastened it around her throat, against her dress, and stood in ecstasy before her reflection. Then she asked, hesitating, full of anxiety, "Could you lend me this? Nothing but this?" "Why, yes, certainly." She flung her arms around her friend's neck, kissed her with abandon, then fled with her treasure. The day of the reception arrived. Mademoiselle was a great success. She was loveliest of all, elegant, gracious, smiling, and full of joy. All the men noticed her, asked her name, and wanted to be introduced to her. All the attachés of the ministry were wanting to waltz with her. Even the minister paid attention to her. She danced with enthusiasm, with passion, drunk with pleasure, thinking of nothing, in the triumph of her beauty, in the glory of her success, in a kind of cloud of happiness, made up of all this homage, all this admiration, all these awakened desires, this victory so complete and so sweet to the heart of woman. She left about 4 o'clock in the morning. Since midnight, her husband had been asleep in one of the little salons with 3 other men whose wives were enjoying themselves very much. He threw on her shoulders the wraps they had brought for the going home, modest garments of everyday wear, whose poverty clashed with the elegance of her ball dress. She felt it and wanted to flee, so as not to be seen by the other women who were wrapping themselves in rich furs. Loisel detained her. "Wait a minute. You'll catch cold outside. I'm going to call a cab." But she would not listen to him, and quickly ran down the staircase. When they were in the street, she found no carriage. They began to look for one, hailing the coachman whom they saw passing in the distance. Hopeless and shivering, they walked along toward the Seine. Finally, they found on the quay one of those old nocturnal coupés that are not seen in Paris except after nightfall, as if they were ashamed of their wretched appearance during the day. It took them to their door in Rue des Martyrs, and they climbed wearily up to their flat. It was all over for her, and on his part he tiredly remembered that he had to be at the ministry by 10 o'clock. She removed the wraps from her shoulders before the mirrors so that she could see herself once again in her glory. But suddenly she cried out. Her necklace was no longer around her neck. Her husband, already half undressed, asked, "What's the matter with you?" She turned to him distractedly. I no longer have Madame Fortier's necklace." He arose aghast. "What? How is that? It isn't possible." And they looked in the folds of her dress, in the folds of the mantle, in the pockets everywhere. They could not find it. He asked, "Are you sure you still had it when you left the ball?" "Yes, I felt it in the vestibule as we came out." "But if you had lost it in the street, we should have heard it fall. It must be in the cab." "Yes, that's likely. Did you take the number?" "No." "And you, did you notice what it was?" "No." They looked at one another, devastated. Finally, Loisel dressed himself again. "I am going," he said, "to retrace all the walk we did on foot, to see if I can find it." And he went. She remained in her evening dress, without strength to go to bed, collapsed in a chair, without fire, without energy, without thought. Her husband came in about 7 o'clock. He had found nothing. He went to the police office, to the newspapers to offer a reward, to the companies that let out cabs for hire, everywhere, in short, where a glimmer of hope remained. She waited all day in a state of bewilderment before this frightful disaster. Loisel returned in the evening, his cheeks harrowed and pale. He had discovered nothing. "It will be necessary," he said, "to write to your friend that you have broken the clasp of her diamonds and that you are having it repaired. That will give us time to explore alternatives." She wrote as he dictated. At the end of the week, they had lost all hope, and Loisel, now older by 5 years, declared, "We must take measures to replace this jewel." The next day they took the box that had enclosed it to the jeweler, whose name was inside. After consulting his books, the jeweler said, "It is not I, madame, who sold this necklace. I only supplied the case." Then they went from jeweler to jeweler, seeking a necklace like the other one, searching their memories, both of them ill with grief and anguish. In a shop of Palais Royal, they found a chaplet of diamonds that seemed to them exactly like the one they had lost. It was valued at 40,000 francs. They could get it for 36,000. They begged the jeweler not to sell it for 3 days, and they made an arrangement by which they might return it for 34,000 francs, should the first string be found before the end of February. Loisel possessed 18,000 francs inherited from his father. He would borrow the rest. He borrowed, asking 1,000 francs from one, 500 from another, 100 francs from here, 60 there. He gave promissory notes, made ruinous promises, took money from usurers and the whole race of moneylenders. He compromised all the rest of his life, risked his signature without even knowing if he could make it good or not. Then, terrified and anguished by the future, by the black misery that engulfed him, and by the prospect of utter ruin, he went to get the new necklace, depositing on the merchant's counter 36,000 francs. When Madame Loisel took back the necklace to Madame Forestier, the latter said to her in an icy tone, "You should have returned them to me sooner, for I might have needed them." She did not open the jewel box, as her friend feared she would. If she should perceive the substitution, what would she think? What would she say? Would she take her for a thief? Madame Loisel now experienced the horrible life of the poverty-stricken. She made her resolution to do her part, however all at once, heroically. This frightful debt had to be paid. She would pay it. The maid was sent away. They changed their lodgings, and the attic was rented up under the roofs. She experienced the heavy work of a house, the odious work of a kitchen. She washed the dishes, wearing out her rosy nails on the greasy pots and the bottoms of saucepans. She washed the soiled linen, the chemises, and the towels, and hung them out to dry on a line. She carried the rubbish down to the street every morning, and brought up the water, stopping at each landing to get her breath. And dressed like a woman of the people, she went to the grocer's and the butcher's, with her basket on her arm, shopping and haggling to the last centime of her miserable money. Every month promissory notes had to be paid, others renewed, time asked for. Her husband worked in the evenings, putting the books of some merchants in order, and at night he often made copies at 25 centimes a page. And his life, this life, lasted for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, the Loisels had paid back everything, with the usurious interest and accumulated interest as well. Madame Loisel seemed old now. She had become a strong, hard woman, the crude woman of poor households. Her hair was badly dressed, her skirts awry, her hands red. She spoke in a loud tone, washed the floors with large pails of water. But sometimes, when her husband was at the office, she would seat herself before the window and dream back to that evening of long ago, of that ball where she had been so beautiful and so admired. What would have happened had she not lost that necklace? Who knows? Who knows? How singular life is, how easily changed, how small a thing it takes to destroy or to save you. One Sunday, as she was taking a walk in Champs-Élysées to relax after the toil of the week, she suddenly perceived a lady walking with a child. It was Madame Forestier, still young, still beautiful, still attractive. Madame Loisel felt moved. Should she speak to her? Now that she had paid, she could tell her everything. Why not? She approached her. "Good morning, Jean." Her friend did not recognize her and was astonished at being addressed so familiarly by this common woman. She stammered, "But, madame—" I do not know. You must be mistaken. No, I am Matilda Loisel. Her friend uttered a cry of astonishment. Oh, my poor Matilda, how you've changed. Yes, I've gone through very hard days since I saw you, and some miserable ones, and all that because of you. Because of me? How is that? Do you remember that necklace of diamonds you lent me to go to the ball at the ministry? Yes. Well? Well, I lost it. How is that? Since you returned it to me. I returned another to you exactly like it, and it has taken us 10 years to pay for it. You can understand that it wasn't easy for us, we who have nothing, but it is finished. For that I'm grateful. Madame Forestier stopped short. She said, You say that you bought a diamond necklace to replace mine? Yes. You didn't notice it then? They were just alike? And she smiled a smile of proud, simple joy. Madame Forestier, deeply moved, took both her hands as she replied, Oh, my poor Matilda! But mine were imitation. They were not worth more than 500 francs. The necklace. Thank you so much for listening. That was written by Guy de Maupassant. Good night, everybody.